A trunk filled with silk gowns and opera gloves arrives in a dusty Colorado mountain town, carrying with it a woman whose refinement threatens to expose the crude pretensions of the man who summoned her. But when sophistication meets genuine appreciation, true elegance reveals its power to transform not just hearts, but entire communities. This is a story about discovering that refinement isn't weakness disguised as strength, but strength disguised as beauty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and promise as the Denver and Rio Grande locomotive pulled into Willowbrook station, its whistle echoing off the surrounding peaks like a herald announcing change. Isabella Harrison gathered her dove-gray traveling cloak closer as she peered through the window at the small Colorado mountain town that would become her new home. The year was 1885, and at 28, Bella understood she was well past the age when most women secured marriage proposals from suitable gentlemen in Boston society. The train lurched to a stop with a great hiss of steam and grinding of brakes. Bella smoothed her perfectly arranged auburn hair and adjusted the small hat perched at precisely the correct angle, its peacock feather trembling slightly in anticipation. Her kid-gloved hands clutched a beaded reticule containing the most precious of her possessions, letters from Samuel Crawford, promising a life of refinement and culture in the Colorado Territory. "All aboard for Willowbrook," the conductor called, though his announcement seemed unnecessary given that half the car's passengers were already gathering their belongings for departure. Bella rose gracefully, her movements carrying the unconscious elegance instilled by years at Miss Pemberton's finishing school for young ladies. Her traveling ensemble, a masterpiece of Boston tailoring in rich burgundy wool with jet buttons and intricate braiding, marked her as distinctly different from the other passengers. While they wore practical woolens and sturdy boots, she embodied a world of opera houses and drawing rooms, of conversations conducted in French and evenings spent discussing literature over fine wine. The porter, a weathered man with kind eyes, helped her descend from the train onto the wooden platform. Behind her came her belongings, trunk after trunk containing the accumulated refinements of a lifetime. Silk evening gowns in jewel tones, morning dresses in delicate pastels, a complete tea service inherited from her grandmother, leather-bound volumes of poetry in 3 languages, and her most treasured possession, a portable pianoforte that had traveled with her from Boston. Willowbrook stretched before her like a scene from an illustrated frontier novel. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with false-fronted buildings that spoke of ambition tempered by practicality. A general store with weathered paint advertised supplies for miners and ranchers. The Silverado Saloon's batwing doors swung constantly as men in rough clothing entered and exited. At the far end of the street, a small white church with a modest steeple provided the only suggestion of the civilized society Bella had known. Yet there were encouraging signs of culture amidst the frontier pragmatism. A building bearing the sign Willowbrook Opera House stood proudly on the corner, its architecture suggesting someone in this mountain community appreciated the finer things. Next to the largest hotel, she spotted what appeared to be a lending library, its windows displaying an inviting collection of books. "Miss Harrison?" The voice belonged to a man approaching across the platform, his stride confident, but his expression uncertain. Samuel Crawford appeared younger than his 32 years as described in his letters, with sandy hair and earnest brown eyes. His attire attempted respectability, a dark suit that had seen better days and boots that, while polished, bore the permanent scuffs of ranch work. "Mr. Crawford," Bella replied, extending her gloved hand with practiced grace. "How pleasant to finally make your acquaintance." Samuel took her hand, his grip firm but brief, as if uncertain how long such contact should last. "Welcome to Willowbrook, Miss Harrison." I trust your journey was comfortable? Quite comfortable, thank you. The mountain scenery was absolutely breathtaking. Bella's voice carried the cultured tones of her upbringing, each word carefully pronounced, each syllable given its proper weight. Samuel's eyes moved from her face to her elaborate traveling costume, then to the growing pile of trunks and cases being unloaded from the baggage car. His expression shifted subtly, pleasure mixing with something that might have been concern. "You certainly travel in style," he observed, watching as the porter struggled with a particularly ornate trunk bound in brass and leather. "I hadn't expected quite so many belongings." "A lady's wardrobe requires certain essentials," Bella replied with a gentle smile, choosing to interpret his comment as admiration rather than criticism. "In your letters, you mentioned entertaining neighbors and establishing cultural refinement. In your home, I brought appropriate attire for such occasions." Indeed, Samuel's correspondence had painted pictures of elegant dinner parties, musical evenings, and the social leadership role his bride would assume in the community. He had written eloquently of his desire for a wife who could bring Eastern sophistication to his Western success, someone who would elevate his standing among the territory's emerging elite. Samuel cleared his throat, seeming to remember his manners. "Of course, quite right. I've arranged accommodation for you at the Grand Hotel while we become better acquainted. Mrs. Webb runs a respectable establishment." As they walked toward the hotel, Bella became aware of the attention her arrival was attracting. Women in practical calico dresses paused in their conversations to study her elaborate costume. Men lounging outside the saloon straightened to get a better look at the vision of Eastern elegance gracing their dusty street. Children pointed openly at her fashionable bustle and the intricate beadwork adorning her traveling cloak. "You're creating quite a sensation," Samuel murmured, and Bella couldn't determine whether pride or embarrassment colored his tone. The Grand Hotel proved to be the finest establishment in Willowbrook, which meant it boasted actual wallpaper. In its lobby and carpets that had once been expensive, Mrs. Webb, the proprietress, was a woman of middle years with sharp eyes and a manner that suggested she tolerated no nonsense from her guests. "So you're Crawford's intended, Mrs. Webb," said without preamble as she examined Bella from head to toe. "Fancy as a wedding cake and probably just as delicate. Hope you know what you're getting into, dear." "I beg your pardon?" Bella replied, taken aback by the woman's directness. Mrs. Webb softened slightly. "No offense meant, miss. It's just that ranch life isn't like what you're probably used to back east. Takes a particular kind of woman to thrive out here." "I assure you, Mrs. Webb, I'm quite adaptable," Bella replied with dignity, though privately she wondered what exactly the woman meant. Samuel had grown increasingly quiet during this exchange, his discomfort evident in the way he shifted his weight and avoided meeting Bella's eyes. "Perhaps we should discuss arrangements over dinner," he suggested. "Mrs. Webb serves excellent beef stew." Bella's room on the second floor was clean and adequately furnished, though quite different from her elegant bedroom in Boston. As she unpacked a few essential items, she reflected on the subtle changes she'd noticed in Samuel's demeanor since her arrival. In his letters, he had seemed confident and cultured, writing knowledgeably about art and literature. In person, he appeared nervous and somehow diminished, as if her presence made him uncomfortable rather than proud. That evening, they dined in the hotel's small restaurant, a room that clearly served as the social center for Willowbrook's more prosperous citizens. The mayor sat at one table with his wife, both of whom nodded politely to Samuel while studying Bella with undisguised curiosity. A group of ranchers occupied another table, their conversation punctuated by glances in her direction. Bella had chosen her dinner dress carefully, a creation of midnight blue silk with modest décolletage and sleeves that ended just below the elbow. It was elegant, but not ostentatious, perfect for a first public appearance in her new community. The effect, however, seemed to be the opposite of what she had intended. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, Subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's quite a dress, Samuel observed as they waited for their meal to arrive. Thank you. I had it made by Madame Laurent on Newbury Street. She's considered one of Boston's finest dressmakers. Samuel nodded absently, but Bella noticed him. Glancing around the room at the other diners, most of whom wore their Sunday best, which consisted of simple dark dresses for the women and plain suits for the men. Her elegant gown, which would have been appropriately modest in Boston society, suddenly felt elaborate and out of place. About the ranch, Samuel began, then paused to take a large swallow of beer. I may have given you the wrong impression in my letters about that is, my circumstances. Bella set down her water glass carefully. In what way? Well, it's a working ranch, you understand, cattle and horses. Gets mighty dusty in summer, muddy in spring. The house is comfortable, but it's not what you'd call fancy. Built for function. More than beauty. I see. Bella kept her voice level, though she felt the first stirring of unease. Your letters spoke of hosting dinners for neighboring ranchers and cultural evenings. Samuel's cheeks reddened. That's something I'd like to work toward, certainly. But right now, most of my neighbors are more interested in cattle prices than cultural refinement. They're good people, but simple folk who might not appreciate some of the finer things you're accustomed to. The meal arrived, interrupting their conversation. The beef stew was indeed excellent, hearty and well-seasoned, though Bella found herself missing the delicate flavors and elegant presentation of the pulp cuisine she was used to. As they ate, Samuel continued to elaborate on the realities of ranch life, each detail further removed from the romantic picture he had painted in his correspondence. The work starts before dawn, he explained. Cattle don't observe social hours. And the men who work for me, they're rough types. Cowboys and drifters, mostly. Not the kind of company a refined lady would find suitable. Bella began to understand that Samuel's vision of refinement was quite different from her reality of it. He seemed to view her elegance as something to be displayed on special occasions, like fine china brought out for important guests rather than an integral part of who she was. Mr. Crawford, she said gently, I hope you don't expect me to abandon my cultural interests entirely. Music and literature aren't simply hobbies for me. They're essential to my nature. Samuel nodded quickly. Of course not. I'm sure you'll find time for such pursuits. Perhaps in the evenings when the day's work is done. But even as he spoke, Bella sensed his discomfort with the idea. It became increasingly clear that while Samuel had wanted a refined wife in theory, the reality of her sophistication intimidated him. He had envisioned someone who could elevate his status without challenging his authority or making him feel inadequate by comparison. After dinner, they took a brief walk down the main street in the cool mountain air. Bella noticed how other couples they passed seemed perfectly matched in their simplicity. Wives who complimented rather than overshadowed their husbands. Samuel's increasing tension suggested he was making the same observation. There's something else we should discuss, he said as they paused in front of the opera house. About appearances and fitting in with the community. Bella studied his profile in the lamplight. What do you mean? Well, that dress you're wearing tonight. It's beautiful, certainly, but it might give people the wrong impression. Make them think you consider yourself above them. The criticism stung, particularly because Bella had chosen the dress specifically for its understated elegance. I would never wish to appear condescending, Mr. Crawford. Perhaps you could advise me on what would be more appropriate. Samuel seemed relieved that she was taking his suggestion well. Something simpler would be better, more practical. The ladies here favor calico and cotton. Nothing too elaborate or expensive looking. As they walked back toward the hotel, Bella reflected on how different this conversation was from what she had expected. Samuel's letters had praised her refinement and cultural accomplishments. Now he seemed to be asking her to hide those very qualities that had attracted him to her. Back in her hotel room, Bella sat at the small writing desk and opened her travel journal, a leather-bound book where she had recorded her thoughts throughout the journey west. By lamplight, she wrote, carefully about her first impressions of Willowbrook and her growing concerns about Samuel's expectations. Outside her window, the town was settling into evening quiet. She could hear the distant sound of a piano from the saloon, someone playing a waltz with more enthusiasm than skill. The melody made her think of her own piano, now sitting in storage at the train depot, and she wondered if there would ever be occasion to play it, in this place that seemed to view refinement as either pretension or impracticality. The next morning brought a clearer understanding of the challenges ahead. Samuel arrived early to escort her to breakfast, dressed in his working clothes, boots dusty from morning chores. Bella had chosen a simple day dress of forest green wool, elegant but considerably less elaborate than her dinner attire. Much better, Samuel approved upon seeing her. You'll fit in just fine once you adjust to our ways. But Bella was beginning to question whether adjusting meant abandoning essential parts of herself. Over breakfast, Samuel outlined his vision of their future together, describing a wife who would manage the household efficiently, entertain occasionally but modestly, and gradually adopt the practical customs of ranch life. The thing is, he explained between bites of eggs and bacon, the folks here work hard for simple pleasures. They might not understand someone who needs fancy things to be happy. It could make them think you're putting on airs. Bella sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Mr. Crawford, do you believe there's something inherently wrong with appreciating beauty and culture? Not wrong, exactly. Just unnecessary and sometimes impractical. This response revealed the fundamental gap between them. Samuel saw refinement as an ornament to be worn when appropriate, while for Bella it was the expression of deeply held values about beauty, excellence, and the elevation of human experience. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Webb, who approached their table with a concerned expression. "Excuse me, Miss Harrison, but there's been some talk about your piano." "My piano?" Bella asked, confused. "The one still sitting at the depot. Folks are wondering what you plan to do with such a thing. It's quite the curiosity." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "About that, Bella, I'm not sure where we'd put a piano at the ranch. The parlor isn't really set up for musical instruments." Bella felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Music is very important to me, Mr. Crawford. I had assumed there would be space for it." "Well, certainly we can work something out, eventually. But you have to understand, the ranch house is built for practical living, not entertainment." This exchange crystallized Bella's growing realization that Samuel had fallen in love with an idea of refinement rather than with her specific manifestation of it. He wanted the prestige of an educated, cultured wife without the reality of what that culture meant in daily life. After breakfast, she excused herself for a solitary walk through town, needing time to think. Willowbrook in daylight revealed both its limitations and its possibilities. The basic infrastructure of civilization was present, but the community seemed to view anything beyond necessity with suspicion. As she walked past the Opera House, she noticed a small sign in the window advertising piano lessons and cultural programs. Curious, she peered through the glass and saw an elegant interior that suggested someone in Willowbrook did appreciate the arts. The sight gave her hope that perhaps she wasn't entirely alone in her values. Her walk was interrupted by the sound of an approaching carriage, but not the rough wagon she might have expected. Instead, an elegant black landau drawn by matched bay horses pulled up beside her. The carriage itself was a work of art, its paintwork gleaming and its brass fittings polished to perfection. The driver, a well-dressed man in his mid-30s, with dark hair and intelligent eyes, touched his hat politely. "Excuse me, miss. You must be the lady who arrived on yesterday's train. I'm James Sterling." Even his voice carried refinement, the kind of educated accent that spoke of Eastern universities and cultured society. Bella found herself responding instinctively to his evident sophistication. "Isabella Harrison," she replied with a slight curtsy. "How do you do, Mr. Sterling?" "Quite well, thank you. I was wondering if you might accept a ride back to your hotel. I understand you're staying at Mrs. Webb's establishment." Bella hesitated, aware that accepting rides from strange men was not strictly proper, but something in James Sterling's manner suggested he understood the rules of civilized behavior. "That's very kind of you," she accepted, allowing him to help her into the carriage. As they drove the short distance to the hotel, James Sterling proved to be an engaging conversationalist. Unlike Samuel's nervous chatter, Sterling's speech flowed naturally from topic to topic, touching on literature, the changing seasons in the mountains, and the cultural development of Western communities. "I noticed you admiring the Opera House," he observed. "Are you interested in music?" "Very much so. I play piano and have had some vocal training." "Excellent. We're always in need of accomplished musicians for our cultural programs." The Opera House may look modest from the outside, but it has excellent acoustics. Bella felt a spark of hope. "You organize cultural events?" "Among other pursuits. I find that civilization requires active cultivation, particularly in frontier communities. One must either create culture or watch it disappear entirely." This was exactly the kind of conversation Bella had hoped to have with Samuel, the acknowledgement that refinement wasn't vanity, but a conscious choice to pursue excellence and beauty. Sterling seemed to understand this instinctively. As the carriage drew up before the hotel, Sterling handed her down with practiced courtesy. "I hope you'll allow me to show you our community's cultural offerings soon, Miss Harrison. Perhaps you'd join me for the concert this Friday evening." "I would be delighted," Bella replied, then remembered her circumstances. "Though I should mention that I'm engaged to Mr. Samuel Crawford." Sterling's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Of course. Perhaps Mr. Crawford would enjoy attending as well." After Sterling departed, Bella stood on the hotel steps thinking about the contrast between her two encounters with Willowbrook men. Samuel seemed to want her to become simpler, while Sterling appeared to appreciate her complexity. The difference was both illuminating and troubling, suggesting that her choice of husband might determine not just her happiness, but her very identity. The following morning brought Samuel to the hotel parlor, hat in hand and expression serious. Bella descended the stairs wearing a dress of soft rose silk, its elegant lines and delicate lace trim representing a compromise between her natural taste and what she now understood to be Samuel's preference for simplicity. Still, she could see the slight tightening around his eyes as he took in her appearance. "Good morning, Isabella. I trust you slept well?" "Quite well, thank you." She accepted his offered arm, noting how he seemed to hold himself differently today, more distant and formal than during their previous meetings. They walked toward the hotel dining room, but Samuel paused before entering. "Actually, I thought we might take breakfast at the ranch this morning. Give you a proper look at what will be your new home." The suggestion pleased Bella, who was eager to see the place Samuel had described so lovingly in his letters. They departed in his wagon, a sturdy but unremarkable vehicle that carried them through the outskirts of Willowbrook and into the rolling hills beyond. The mountain scenery was undeniably beautiful, with golden aspens trembling in the morning breeze and distant peaks crowned with early snow. The Crawford ranch house appeared after 20 minutes of travel, and Bella's first sight of it confirmed her growing suspicions about the gap between Samuel's letters and reality. The structure was solid and well-built, but strictly functional. A two-story frame building with a wraparound porch that spoke of comfort rather than elegance. Nothing about its plain lines or simple proportions suggested the refined homestead Samuel had described. "Here we are," Samuel announced with forced cheer. "Home sweet home." Bella smiled diplomatically as he helped her down from the wagon. "It's quite substantial. Very practical." "Practical is the word for it," Samuel agreed, leading her toward the front door. Built to last through mountain winters and handle the demands of ranch life. Inside, the house proved to be clean and adequately furnished, but again, purely utilitarian. The parlor contained a horsehair sofa, 2 wooden chairs, and a simple oak table. The walls were bare except for a single tintype photograph of what appeared to be Samuel's parents. There was no piano, no space for musical instruments, no evidence of the cultural refinement Samuel had promised. "The furniture is quite serviceable," Bella observed, running her gloved fingers along the back of the sofa. "Got it all from Denver last year." The salesman said it was the finest quality available west of the Mississippi. Bella nodded politely, though she recognized the furniture as mass-produced pieces designed for durability rather than beauty. The entire room felt like a stage set dressed for the idea of genteel living without understanding what such living actually entailed. Samuel showed her through the kitchen, which was spacious and efficient, clearly designed for feeding ranch hands as well as family. The bedrooms upstairs were equally practical, with simple iron bedsteads and plain wooden wardrobes. Everything was clean and functional, but devoid of the aesthetic touches that made a house feel like a home to someone of Bella's sensibilities. "Of course, you'll want to add your own touches," Samuel said as they returned to the parlor. "Women always do. Just remember that everything needs to be practical for ranch life." They sat down for coffee served by Samuel's housekeeper, Mrs. Parker, a weathered woman who regarded Bella with undisguised skepticism. The coffee was strong and bitter, served in thick ceramic cups that bore no resemblance to the delicate china Bella was accustomed to. "Mrs. Parker's been keeping house for me since my mother passed," Samuel explained. "She knows how things should be done around here," Mrs. Parker snorted. "I know how to run a ranch house, not some fancy Eastern parlor. No use for frippery and nonsense when there's real work to be done." Bella kept her expression pleasant despite the obvious slight. "I'm sure we'll work together very well, Mrs. Parker. I have great respect for efficient household management." "Efficient is one thing," Mrs. Parker replied. "Fancy is another. Ranch wives need to know their priorities." The pointed comment hung in the air as Samuel seemed to study Bella's reaction. She began to understand that this visit was serving as a test, a way for him to gauge how she would adapt to his vision of appropriate behavior. After Mrs. Parker left them alone, Samuel leaned forward in his chair. "Isabella, there are some things we need to discuss before we finalize our engagement." The formal tone sent a chill through Bella's heart. "Of course, what concerns you?" "Yesterday evening, several people in town mentioned your elaborate appearance. They're wondering if you'll fit in with our community." Bella set down her coffee cup carefully. "I see. And what do you think?" Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "I think you're a fine woman, but perhaps we need to discuss expectations. Ranch life requires certain adjustments, particularly for someone from your background." "What sort of adjustments?" "Well, for instance, that dress you're wearing today. It's beautiful, but it's not practical for a ranch wife. The fabric would be ruined by dust and work, and frankly, it might make the other wives feel inadequate." Bella looked down at her rose silk dress, which she had considered quite modest and appropriate. "I have simpler clothing as well, Mr. Crawford. I understood there would be occasions requiring different attire. The thing is, Isabella, almost every occasion out here requires practical attire. Sunday services might call for something bit nicer, but even then, nothing too elaborate. We can't have you standing out like a peacock among sparrows." The comparison stung, particularly since Bella had always taken pride in her tasteful restraint. "Are you suggesting I abandon my wardrobe entirely?" "Not abandon, necessarily, but perhaps put aside the more elaborate pieces. At least until you've established yourself in the community." Samuel stood and walked to the window overlooking his ranch yard, where several cowboys were working with horses. "You have to understand, Isabella, these are simple people with simple values. They respect hard work and practical wisdom. If they think you consider yourself above them, it could make life difficult for both of us." Bella joined him at the window, watching the men work. "I would never consider myself superior to anyone based on clothing or possessions, Mr. Crawford, but I hope you don't expect me to pretend to be someone I'm not." Samuel turned to face her, his expression earnest, but inflexible. "I'm not asking you to pretend anything. I'm asking you to adapt. To understand that what might be appropriate in Boston society isn't necessarily suitable for Colorado ranch life." The conversation continued for another hour, with Samuel outlining his vision of their future together. He spoke of community, acceptance, practical considerations, and the need for his wife to complement rather than overshadow his position in local society. With each word, Bella felt herself being asked to become smaller, simpler, less than she was. "What about music?" she finally asked. "You wrote so enthusiastically about cultural evenings and musical entertainment." Samuel's expression grew uncomfortable. "Well, certainly, you could play for family gatherings. Nothing too elaborate, mind you. Simple songs that folks could sing along with. Maybe some hymns for church socials. And my piano? That's another matter we need to discuss. The truth is, Isabella, there really isn't a proper place for a concert piano in a ranch house. Perhaps something smaller would be more appropriate. A simple upright that wouldn't take up so much space." Bella felt something break inside her chest. Her piano wasn't just an instrument. It was her voice, her connection to the beauty and refinement that gave her life meaning. The suggestion that she replace it with something more convenient revealed how little Samuel understood about what mattered to her. "Mr. Crawford," she said quietly, "I'm beginning to think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding between us." Samuel's face brightened, apparently interpreting this as willingness to compromise. "I'm glad you see it that way, Isabella. I knew you were a sensible woman underneath all that Boston refinement." "What I see," Bella continued, her voice gaining strength, "is that you fell in love with an idea rather than a person. You wanted the prestige of a refined wife without the reality of what refinement actually means." Samuel's expression shifted to confusion. "I don't understand. Refinement isn't a costume one puts on for special occasions, Mr. Crawford. It's a way of seeing the world, of valuing beauty and excellence and cultural achievement. You can't ask me to abandon these things, any more than you could ask me to abandon my own shadow." "I'm not asking you to abandon anything," Samuel protested. "Just to modify, to adapt to local customs. You're asking me to become a different person entirely. To value practicality over beauty, conformity over excellence, fitting in over standing out for worthwhile reasons." The argument that followed was painful but necessary. Samuel couldn't understand why Bella wouldn't simply adapt her tastes to match community expectations. Bella couldn't comprehend how he expected her to abandon the very qualities that had attracted him to her correspondence. "Perhaps," Samuel said finally, his voice cold with wounded pride, "you're not as adaptable as I had hoped. Perhaps you're too set in your fancy Eastern ways to make a proper ranch wife. And perhaps," Bella replied with quiet dignity, "you're not the man your letter suggested. Perhaps you're more interested in the appearance of refinement than its substance." They rode back to town in tense silence, the morning's revelations hanging between them like a wall. Samuel's dream of social elevation through marriage had crashed against the reality of what Bella represented, while her hopes for partnership with a cultured man had been revealed as fantasy. At the hotel, Samuel helped her down from the wagon. With perfunctory courtesy, "I think we both need time to consider our situation, Isabella. Perhaps you should extend your stay at the hotel while we determine if our differences can be resolved." Bella understood the subtext. Samuel was giving her an ultimatum: change or be abandoned. "I think that would be wise, Mr. Crawford. Thank you for your honesty about your expectations." As Samuel drove away, Bella stood on the hotel steps feeling more alone than she had since leaving Boston. Mrs. Webb appeared beside her, having witnessed the uncomfortable parting. "Trouble in paradise?" the older woman asked with gruff sympathy. "It seems Mr. Crawford and I have different definitions of compatibility," Bella replied with as much dignity as she could muster. Mrs. Webb snorted. "Sam Crawford wouldn't know. Refinement if it bit him on his backside. Been putting on airs ever since he inherited that ranch, thinking he's better than the rest of us. Wants a wife who'll make him look important without making him feel small." The accurate assessment stung because it confirmed Bella's own painful realization. "I suppose I should have recognized the signs earlier. Honey, when a man writes better letters than he talks, that's usually your first clue something's amiss. Come inside and have some tea. You look like you could use it." That afternoon, Bella sat in her hotel room writing letters to her few remaining friends in Boston, trying to explain her situation without revealing the full extent of her humiliation. She had sold her small inheritance to fund this journey west, believing she was moving toward a new life of purpose and partnership. Now she faced the prospect of returning east with neither money nor prospects, having been rejected for the very qualities she had been taught to value. A knock at her door interrupted her melancholy reflections. Mrs. Webb entered bearing a tea tray and wearing an expression of determined cheer. "Stop sitting here feeling sorry for yourself," the older woman announced, setting down the tray with authority. "Sam Crawford's loss is someone else's gain, and moping won't change anything." "I'm not moping," Bella protested. "I'm considering my options, which are..." Bella poured tea from the simple china pot, appreciating the small ritual of civilized behavior. "Return to Boston and hope someone will hire me as a governess or companion. It's about the only respectable employment available to women of my background." Mrs. Webb studied her shrewdly. "What about staying here in Willowbrook? We could use some culture in this town." "Doing what?" "Mr. Crawford has made it clear that my particular form of refinement isn't welcome here." "Sam Crawford doesn't speak for the whole town," Mrs. Webb replied tartly. "There are plenty of folks here who'd appreciate some genuine culture. The Opera House has been looking for someone to organize proper concerts and cultural programs." Bella's interest stirred despite her depression. "The Opera House actually hosts cultural events? When someone bothers to organize them?" "The Vale building was donated by someone who believed frontier towns needed civilizing influences. Problem is, most folks around here wouldn't know how to plan a proper cultural evening if their lives depended on it." The possibility intrigued Bella, offering an alternative to both marriage to Samuel and retreat to Boston. "Who would I speak with about such a position?" Mrs. Webb smiled mysteriously. "Funny you should ask. James Sterling stopped by earlier, asking about your circumstances. Seems he heard about your troubles with Crawford and wanted to know if you might be interested in discussing cultural opportunities in Willowbrook." The mention of Sterling's name brought a flutter of something that might have been hope. "Mr. Sterling was asking about me? Said he was impressed by your obvious refinement and thought the town could benefit from your particular talents. Asked if you might be free to join him for dinner this evening to discuss possibilities." Bella hesitated, aware that dining with a gentleman while technically engaged to another man crossed certain boundaries of propriety. Yet her situation with Samuel had clearly deteriorated beyond repair, and Sterling represented a connection to the cultured world she feared losing entirely. "Did he suggest a particular restaurant?" Mrs. Webb's eyes twinkled. "His own dining room. Seems Mr. Sterling has a properly appointed home and a cook who knows how to prepare a civilized meal. Said he thought you might appreciate dining in surroundings more suited to your sensibilities." The invitation was clearly improper by Boston standards, yet Bella found herself tempted. Sterling had shown genuine appreciation for culture and refinement, qualities that Samuel had ultimately rejected. Perhaps a conversation about cultural opportunities would help her determine whether Willowbrook held any real possibilities for her future. I suppose it couldn't hurt to hear what he has to propose, Bella said carefully. Professionally speaking, of course. Mrs. Webb nodded approvingly. Of course. Sterling's carriage will call for you at 7. And Miss Harrison? You might want to wear one of your finer dresses. Sterling appreciates quality when he sees it. That evening, Bella prepared for dinner with more care than she had taken since arriving in Willowbrook. She chose a gown of deep emerald silk with intricate beadwork that caught the light like dewdrops. The dress represented the finest of her wardrobe, a creation that would have been appropriate for the most elegant Boston dinner parties. Looking at herself in the hotel room's modest mirror, Bella realized she was making a choice. She could continue trying to diminish herself to meet Samuel's expectations, or she could present herself authentically and see if anyone in Willowbrook appreciated what she truly had to offer. At precisely 7 o'clock, Sterling's elegant carriage arrived at the hotel. The driver who had spoken with her the previous day helped her into the luxurious interior, and they set off through the mountain evening toward whatever possibilities awaited. As they drove through the gathering dusk, Bella reflected on how quickly her circumstances had changed. Yesterday, she had been an engaged woman preparing to adapt herself to her fiancé's wishes. Tonight she was essentially free, about to dine with a man who might offer her an entirely different future in this frontier town. The Sterling mansion appeared around a bend in the mountain road like something from a fairy tale. Unlike Samuel's functional ranch house, this was a true estate. A 3-story Victorian masterpiece that would have looked at home in the finest neighborhoods of Boston or New York. Elegant bay windows glowed with warm light, and the wraparound porch featured intricate gingerbread trim that spoke of both prosperity and refined taste. Sterling himself greeted her at the front door, dressed in evening clothes that rivaled anything she had seen in Boston society. His dark hair was perfectly groomed, and his manner carried the effortless confidence of a man comfortable and refined surroundings. Miss Harrison, welcome to Sterling Manor. You look absolutely radiant this evening. The compliment was delivered with such genuine appreciation that Bella felt herself standing straighter, remembering what it felt like to be admired rather than criticized for her refinement. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Your home is magnificent. I hope you'll allow me to show you around after dinner. I think you'll appreciate some of the cultural treasures I've collected over the years. He escorted her into a foyer that took her breath away. The walls were hung with oil paintings and gilded frames, the floors covered with Persian rugs that rivaled anything in Boston's finest homes. A crystal chandelier cast rainbow patterns across polished marble surfaces, and fresh flowers from a conservatory filled the air with delicate fragrance. This is extraordinary, Bella murmured, drinking in the beauty surrounding her. I had no idea such elegance existed in Colorado territory. Sterling smiled with obvious pleasure at her reaction. Civilization is a choice, Miss Harrison, not an accident of geography. One can create beauty anywhere if one has the vision and determination to do so. The dining room continued the theme of elegant refinement. The table was set with china that would have graced the finest Boston homes, crystal that caught the candlelight like captured stars, and silver that gleamed with the patina of quality. Fresh orchids formed a centerpiece that spoke of both expense and exquisite taste. As they dined on course after perfect course, Bella found herself in conversation unlike any she had experienced since leaving Boston. Sterling spoke knowledgeably about art and literature, music and philosophy, demonstrating not just education but genuine passion for cultural refinement. You must find Willowbrook rather provincial after Boston, he observed over the fish course. I'm discovering that provincial attitudes can exist anywhere, Bella replied carefully, while appreciation for culture can flourish in the most unexpected places. Sterling's eyes twinkled with understanding. I take it your courtship with Crawford isn't proceeding as smoothly as hoped? Bella hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy. Mr. Crawford and I have discovered fundamental incompatibilities regarding the role of culture and refinement in daily life. His loss, Sterling said simply, though perhaps his limitations create opportunities for others who can properly appreciate what you have to offer. After dinner, Sterling guided her through his mansion, revealing room after room of cultured elegance. A library containing thousands of volumes in multiple languages, a music room with both a grand piano and a pipe organ, an art gallery featuring works by both European masters and talented American artists. "This is what I wanted to discuss with you, Miss Harrison," Sterling said as they stood in the music room. "Willowbrook has tremendous potential for cultural development, but it lacks someone with the knowledge and refinement to guide such efforts." Bella ran her fingers along the piano keys, producing a cascade of notes that rang pure and true in the perfect acoustics. "What did you have in mind?" "A position as cultural director for the Willowbrook Art Society. We would provide you with a comfortable salary, appropriate housing, and complete authority to organize concerts, lectures, art exhibitions, whatever you believe would elevate the cultural life of our community." The offer was more than Bella had dared hope for, a chance to use her refinement professionally rather than apologize for it. And the community would support such efforts? Sterling smiled confidently. The right people would support them. "Miss Harrison, those who matter, those who appreciate quality and excellence. As for the others, they can either develop their sensibilities or remain on the periphery of true civilization." It was exactly what Bella wanted to hear, affirmation that her values had worth and that she could build a meaningful life around them. Yet something in Sterling's tone gave her pause, a dismissiveness toward those who didn't share their elevated tastes that echoed uncomfortably with attitudes she had encountered in Boston's most exclusive circles. "Of course," Sterling continued, "such a position would require absolute dedication to excellence. No compromising with mediocrity, no diluting quality to accommodate provincial sensibilities." Bella nodded, though privately she wondered about the balance between maintaining standards and serving a diverse community. "When would you need an answer to your generous offer?" "No rush at all," Sterling assured her. "Take whatever time you need to consider. Though I should mention that the position would be more than merely professional. I would hope that someone sharing my commitment to cultural refinement might also share my personal life." The implication was clear, and Bella felt her cheeks warm. Sterling was offering not just employment but courtship, the prospect of partnership with someone who truly valued her refinement. As his carriage returned her to the hotel that evening, Bella's mind raced with possibilities. She could remain in Willowbrook not as Samuel's reluctantly adapted wife, but as Sterling's cherished partner in cultural elevation. The prospect was intoxicating, offering everything she had hoped to find in marriage to Samuel, but with genuine appreciation instead of grudging tolerance. Yet as she prepared for bed in her simple hotel room, Bella found herself thinking about the people she had met in Willowbrook, the honest ranchers and their wives, the hardworking cowboys, even Mrs. Webb with her gruff kindness. Sterling's vision of cultural elevation seemed to exclude rather than include, to create barriers rather than build bridges. Still, what alternative did she have? Return to Boston in defeat, or accept Sterling's offer and finally find the refined life she had always sought? As she drifted off to sleep, Bella couldn't shake the feeling that her choice would determine not just her own future, but the kind of person she would ultimately become. The morning sun streaming through her hotel window found Bella sitting at the small writing desk, her correspondence with Sterling spread before her like possibilities waiting to be explored. 3 days had passed since their dinner at Sterling Manor, and his formal offer of employment as Willowbrook's cultural director had arrived with the Morning Post, written on elegant stationery that spoke of serious intent. Mrs. Webb knocked softly before entering with a breakfast tray, her sharp eyes immediately taking in the official documents. Making important decisions, I see. Mr. Sterling has offered me a position organizing cultural events for the community, Bella explained, folding the letter carefully. It would allow me to remain in Willowbrook independently. And what does Sam Crawford think of that arrangement? Bella's laugh held no humor. Mr. Crawford made his feelings quite clear yesterday, when he came to retrieve his proposal of marriage. He seems to believe I've proven myself unsuitable for frontier life. The confrontation with Samuel had been brief but painful. He had arrived at the hotel with wounded pride evident in every line of his posture, demanding to know if she intended to make a spectacle of herself by remaining in town after their failed courtship. When Bella had quietly explained that she was considering other opportunities, Samuel had exploded into accusations about her vanity and impracticality. "Women like you always think you're too good for honest work and simple living," he had declared. "Mark my words, Isabella, your fancy ways will leave you alone and bitter. No decent man wants a wife who thinks she knows better than he does about everything." Mrs. Webb poured coffee from the pot on the tray, her movements sharp with irritation at the memory. "Sam Crawford's got about as much culture as a barn cat. Good riddance to him, I say." Perhaps. But his words weren't entirely without merit. "I do have very particular standards, and I'm not willing to compromise them for the sake of fitting in." "Nothing wrong with having standards, honey. The question is whether you're using them to build something worthwhile or just to keep the world at arm's length." The observation was more perceptive than Bella cared to admit. Since Sterling's offer, she had found herself mentally dividing Willowbrook's residents into those who appreciated culture and those who merely tolerated it. The division felt both natural and troubling, echoing attitudes she had witnessed in Boston's most exclusive circles. A commotion in the street below drew her attention to the window. A group of children had gathered around a woman carrying a worn carpet bag, their excited voices carrying up to her room. Bella recognized the newcomer as someone who had arrived on the morning train, a young woman with tired eyes and clothing that spoke of long travel and limited means. "Another mail-order bride," Mrs. Webb observed, joining Bella at the window. "Third one this month." Word's getting around that Colorado territory offers opportunities for women willing to take chances. Bella watched as the woman looked around, uncertainly, clearly overwhelmed by her unfamiliar surroundings. The sight stirred unexpected sympathy, reminding her of her own recent arrival and the vulnerability of hoping for a new beginning in an unknown place. "Perhaps I should introduce myself," Bella murmured. "She looks as though she could use a friendly face." Mrs. Webb smiled approvingly. "Now that's the kind of thinking that might actually do some good around here." Bella dressed quickly in a simple but elegant day dress of navy wool, choosing her appearance carefully to appear approachable rather than intimidating. Downstairs, she found the newcomer in the hotel lobby, speaking quietly with Mrs. Webb about accommodation. "Excuse me," Bella approached with a warm smile. "I couldn't help noticing you've just arrived. I'm Isabella Harrison, and I wanted to welcome you to Willowbrook." The woman looked up with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, that's very kind. I'm Margaret Chen. I've come from San Francisco to meet my intended, but I'm afraid I'm not sure where to find him." The name prompted Bella to look more closely, realizing that Margaret was of mixed heritage, her delicate features suggesting both American and Chinese ancestry. In California, such heritage might pass unremarked, but in a small Colorado town, it could present significant challenges. "Who are you meant to meet?" Bella asked gently. "Mr. Henry Walsh. He owns a ranch north of town, according to his letters." Mrs. Webb and Bella exchanged glances. Henry Walsh was known as a decent man, but one who had struggled to find a wife willing to share the isolation of his remote ranch. His correspondence with Margaret had apparently omitted certain Details about both his circumstances and the community's potential reaction to her heritage. "Mr. Walsh is indeed a respectable rancher," Bella said carefully. "Perhaps I could accompany you when you meet him? Sometimes it helps to have another woman present during such initial meetings." Margaret's relief was visible. "I would appreciate that enormously. I confess I'm rather nervous about the whole arrangement." Later that afternoon, the three women made the journey to Walsh's ranch in Mrs. Webb's buggy. The ranch proved to be even more remote than Samuel's, situated in a narrow valley where the nearest neighbor lived 5 miles away. The house was well built but showed signs of neglect that only a woman's touch could remedy. Henry Walsh emerged to greet them, a tall, weathered man in his 40s whose honest face reflected both hope and anxiety. His reaction to seeing Margaret was complex, surprise and uncertainty, warring with obvious attraction to her delicate beauty. "Miss Chun," he said formally, removing his hat. "Welcome to Colorado territory." The initial conversation was stilted, with both Henry and Margaret clearly struggling to reconcile their correspondence with reality. Henry had written of seeking a refined wife to share his prosperous ranch, while Margaret had described herself as an educated woman experienced in household management. Both descriptions were technically accurate, but incomplete. As the afternoon progressed, Bella found herself serving as translator between two people who had built their hopes on partial truths. Henry was indeed prosperous by frontier standards, but his ranch was isolated and demanded harsh physical labor. Margaret was educated and refined, but her mixed heritage and unfamiliarity with ranch life presented challenges that neither had fully considered. "Perhaps you'd like to stay in town for a few days while you both consider your compatibility," Bella suggested diplomatically. "These decisions shouldn't be rushed." Henry nodded gratefully. "That might be wise. I've arranged accommodation at the hotel, Miss Chen. Take whatever time you need." During the ride back to town, Margaret confided her concerns. "I should have been more honest about my background in my letters. Some people are uncomfortable with my heritage. And Mr. Walsh should have been more forthcoming about the isolation of his ranch," Bella replied. "Mutual honesty is essential for successful marriages," Mrs. Webb snorted. "Most of these mail-order arrangements start with fairy tales and end with harsh reality. Question is whether folks are willing to work with the truth once they find it." That evening, Bella found herself invited to dine with Sterling again, this time at the hotel restaurant where their conversation could be more public. Sterling appeared particularly elegant in his evening attire, drawing admiring glances from other diners as he escorted Bella to their table. "I understand you've been playing matchmaker," Sterling observed as they settled into their chairs, helping to sort out the latest mail-order romance. Word traveled quickly in Willowbrook, and Bella wasn't surprised that Sterling had heard about Margaret's arrival. "Miss Chun seems like a delightful young woman. I hope she and Mr. Walsh can find common ground." Sterling's expression suggested skepticism. "Walsh is a decent enough fellow, but hardly sophisticated, and the young woman's heritage might present certain challenges in a community like this." The casual dismissal troubled Bella. Miss Chun is educated and cultured. Her heritage shouldn't matter to people of genuine refinement. "Ideally, no," Sterling agreed smoothly. "But we must be realistic about social dynamics, particularly in frontier communities. Some barriers are simply impractical to ignore." Bella studied Sterling's handsome face, searching for signs of the man who had seemed so enlightened during their previous conversations. "Are you suggesting that cultural advancement should exclude people based on their ancestry?" "I'm suggesting that cultural leadership requires choosing one's associates carefully. Excellence attracts excellence, while association with the marginal tends to diminish one's own standing." The words crystallized something that had been troubling Bella about Sterling's vision of culture. His refinement seemed predicated on exclusion rather than elevation, on maintaining barriers rather than breaking them down. "I've always believed that true culture should be inclusive," Bella said quietly. "That refinement should lift others up rather than hold them at a distance." Sterling reached across the table to touch her hand. "My dear Isabella, such sentiments are admirable in theory, but practical cultural development requires discrimination, the ability to recognize and cultivate genuine quality while avoiding dilution by lesser elements." The conversation continued through dinner, with Sterling outlining his plans for Willowbrook's cultural future. He spoke of bringing in distinguished lecturers from Denver and San Francisco, of creating exclusive salons for the community's intellectual elite, of establishing cultural standards that would attract the right sort of residents. "And what happens to those who don't meet these standards?" Bella asked. "They remain free to pursue their own level of culture," Sterling replied with a shrug. "Not everyone is suited for genuine refinement. Attempting to force elevation often results in mere pretension." By the time dessert arrived, Bella was beginning to understand that Sterling's appreciation for her refinement came with strings attached. He valued her culture as a complement to his own vision of exclusivity, not as a force for community development. Their conversation was interrupted by a disturbance at another table, where several ranch hands were making loud comments about foreign women and mixed breeds, taking opportunities from honest American girls. The references to Margaret were unmistakable and deeply offensive. Bella half rose from her chair, prepared to address the men directly, but Sterling caught her arm. "Don't create a scene, Isabella. Such people aren't worth engaging. Those men are insulting a guest in this hotel," Bella said firmly. "Someone should defend Miss Chun's dignity. And accomplish what? You'd only lower yourself to their level while solving nothing." Before Bella could respond, another voice cut through the restaurant's buzz of conversation. "Gentlemen, I believe your comments are disturbing other diners." James Sterling, who Bella realized she had been confusing with another man entirely, stood near the offensive table with quiet authority. This James Sterling was different from her dinner companion, broader in the shoulders and more weathered in the face, with calloused hands that spoke of physical work rather than leisure. "We're just talking, Sterling," one of the ranch hands replied belligerently. "Free country, last I heard." "Indeed it is," the real James Sterling agreed. "Free enough that Miss Chun deserves the same respect as any other guest in this establishment." The exchange that followed revealed layers of community dynamics that Bella was only beginning to understand. The man she had been dining with was Victor Sterling, James Sterling's cousin, who had inherited a fortune but not the respect that came with earning it. The real James Sterling had built his success through intelligence and hard work, creating prosperity that benefited the entire community. As Victor Sterling's true nature became apparent through his reaction to the confrontation, Bella felt her romantic illusions crumbling. Victor was indeed cultured and refined, but his culture was a veneer over fundamental character flaws. He spoke beautifully about art and literature, but lacked the moral courage to defend basic human dignity. The real James Sterling, meanwhile, handled the situation with a combination of firmness and diplomacy that restored order without creating lasting enmity. His approach demonstrated a different kind of refinement, one based on character rather than education, on actions rather than words. After the disturbance ended and the offending ranch hands had been persuaded to leave, Bella found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about Willowbrook's social dynamics. Victor Sterling continued their dinner conversation as if nothing had happened, dismissing the incident as proof that strict social boundaries were necessary. "You see why exclusivity is so important," he said, resuming his seat. "Allow the wrong elements into civilized spaces, and chaos inevitably follows." But Bella was watching James Sterling as he quietly checked on Margaret Chun, who had witnessed the ugly scene from across the room. His consideration for her dignity and his genuine concern for her welfare spoke to values that transcended mere social position. The contrast between the two Sterlings became a metaphor for the choice Bella faced about her own future. Victor offered her refinement without responsibility, culture without character, elegance without empathy. James Sterling represented something more complex, a man who appreciated beauty and excellence, but understood that true culture required moral foundation. Later that evening, as Victor escorted her back to the hotel, Bella found herself questioning everything about his offer of employment and courtship. His vision of cultural leadership began to seem less like elevation and more like isolation, creating barriers between people rather than building bridges. "I hope tonight's unpleasantness won't influence your decision about my proposal," Victor said as they paused outside the hotel. "Such incidents only prove how much this community needs proper cultural guidance." "I'm beginning to think," Bella replied carefully, "that proper cultural guidance should include helping people overcome their prejudices rather than reinforcing them." Victor's smile grew tight. "My dear Isabella, prejudice is simply discrimination, exercised by those with insufficient education to express it elegantly. The underlying reality remains the same." The casual cruelty of the observation confirmed Bella's growing doubts. Victor Sterling's refinement was real but hollow, sophisticated in form but corrupt in substance. His offer of partnership would require her to become someone she didn't want to be, using her culture as a weapon rather than a gift. As she prepared for bed that night, Bella reflected on the day's revelations. Margaret Chun's arrival had forced her to confront uncomfortable questions about inclusivity and belonging. The confrontation in the restaurant had revealed the true character of both Sterling cousins, and her own reactions had shown her what kind of person she wanted to become. The choice between Samuel Crawford and Victor Sterling was really no choice at all. Samuel wanted her to diminish her refinement to fit his limited vision, while Victor wanted her to weaponize it for his exclusive purposes. Neither man truly appreciated her culture for what it could contribute to community life. But James Sterling's intervention on Margaret's behalf suggested a third possibility: someone who understood that genuine refinement required moral courage as well as aesthetic appreciation. His actions demonstrated the kind of leadership Bella had always hoped to find: the integration of culture and character that could truly elevate a community. The next morning brought a note from Margaret, asking if Bella might join her for breakfast to discuss her situation with Henry Walsh. The young woman had spent a sleepless night weighing her options, just as Bella had been doing. "I keep thinking about what you said yesterday," Margaret confided as they sat in the hotel dining room, "about mutual honesty being essential for successful marriages. I'm not sure Henry and I were entirely honest with each other in our letters." Bella poured coffee for both of them, grateful for the distraction from her own romantic dilemmas. "What aspects concern you most?" "He's a good man, I can see that. But his ranch is so isolated, and I'm not sure either of us fully understood what we were promising. He wanted a refined wife to elevate his social standing, but I think he expected someone who would also adapt completely to frontier life." The parallel to Bella's own situation with Samuel Crawford was unmistakable. "And what do you want from marriage, Miss Chun?" Margaret stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Partnership, I suppose. Someone who values what I bring to the relationship while being honest about what our life together would actually entail. I don't need luxury, but I do need respect and genuine affection. Those seem like reasonable expectations. The problem is, I'm not sure Henry can offer them. Not because he's a bad person, but because he's struggling with his own expectations and disappointments. And then there's the question of how the community would accept our marriage." Bella thought about the ugly scene in the restaurant the previous evening, about Victor Sterling's casual dismissal of social barriers, about James Sterling's principled defense of dignity. Some members of the community might be more accepting than others. That's what Mr. James Sterling suggested when he spoke with me after last night's incident. He seems to think there are decent people in Willowbrook who judge others by character rather than appearances. The mention of James Sterling sent an unexpected flutter through Bella's chest. He spoke with you about the situation? Very kindly. He apologized for the behavior of those men and assured me that not everyone in town shared their attitudes. He also suggested that I shouldn't make any hasty decisions about Mr. Walsh based on other people's prejudices. Bella found herself curious about James Sterling's perspective on Margaret's situation, and by extension, on the broader questions of community and belonging that she was grappling with herself. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Henry Walsh, hat in hand and expression earnest. "Miss Chun, Miss Harrison. I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to speak with both of you about yesterday's conversation." Margaret gestured for him to join them. "Please sit down, Mr. Walsh. I was just telling Miss Harrison about my concerns regarding our compatibility." Henry settled into the chair across from them, his weathered hands gripping his hat brim. Nervously, "I've done some thinking since yesterday, and I owe you both an apology. I wasn't entirely honest in my letters about what marriage to me would actually entail." The admission surprised both women. In what way? Margaret asked gently. "I talked about wanting a refined wife to share my prosperous ranch, and both of those things are true as far as they go. But I didn't mention how isolated the ranch is, how hard the winters can be, how much of the work would fall to you during busy seasons. I painted a picture of genteel ranch life that doesn't really exist." Margaret's expression softened with respect for his honesty. "And I wasn't entirely forthcoming about my background and the challenges it might present in a small community." Henry nodded. "I've heard talk around town. Some folks have strong opinions about such things. I want you to know that your heritage doesn't matter to me personally, but I'd be lying if I said it wouldn't affect how some people treat us." The conversation that followed was refreshingly honest, with both Henry and Margaret acknowledging the gap between their romantic correspondence and practical reality. They discussed the isolation of ranch life, the challenges of community acceptance, and their mutual desire for genuine partnership despite the obstacles. "The question is," Henry said finally, "whether we're willing to work together to build something real instead of trying to live up to the fantasies we created in our letters." Margaret considered this carefully. "I think I'd be willing to try, if you're certain you want a wife who might bring complications along with companionship." "Miss Chun," Henry said with the first real smile Bella had seen from him, "I've been alone on that ranch for 8 years. I think I can handle a few complications if they come with intelligent conversation and genuine affection." Watching the tentative understanding develop between Henry and Margaret, Bella found herself thinking about the nature of successful partnerships. Both people were choosing to work with reality rather than fantasy, to build something authentic, rather than trying to fulfill impossible expectations. Their example highlighted the falseness of both her previous romantic options. Samuel had wanted her to abandon her authentic self, while Victor wanted her to use her authenticity as a tool for exclusion. Neither offered the genuine partnership that seemed to be developing between Henry and Margaret. As the three of them discussed practical arrangements for Margaret's extended stay in Willowbrook, while she and Henry explored their compatibility, Bella found herself wondering if there might be other possibilities she hadn't yet considered. The thought of James Sterling's quiet strength and moral courage lingered in her mind, suggesting that her choices might not be as limited as she had believed. The morning's revelations left her with new questions about what she truly wanted from life in Willowbrook, and what she might be willing to contribute to a community that was clearly struggling to define its own values and character. The morning of Willowbrook's first annual Harvest Festival dawned crisp and clear, with golden aspens shimmering against the deep blue Colorado sky. Bella stood at her hotel window watching the townspeople prepare for the celebration, her heart heavy with the decision she knew she must make. Victor Sterling's offer lay on her desk, elegant stationery demanding an answer she was no longer willing to give. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Margaret Chun entered, radiant with happiness. despite the simple calico dress she now wore instead of her traveling silks. The past 2 weeks had transformed her from an uncertain, mail-order bride into a confident woman who had found her place in an unexpected partnership. "The festival preparations are wonderful," Margaret said, joining Bella at the window. "Henry says the whole territory will be watching to see if Willowbrook can host a proper celebration." Below them, the main street had been transformed with colorful bunting and wooden booths. Local farmers displayed their harvest bounty while their wives arranged quilts and preserves for judging. Children ran between the stalls with infectious excitement, their laughter carrying on the mountain air. "You seem happy with your decision to stay," Bella observed, noting the contentment in Margaret's expression. "Henry and I are building something real together," Margaret replied. "It's not the fairy tale romance I imagined, but it's honest and growing stronger every day. What about you? Have you decided about Mr. Victor Sterling's proposal?" Bella fingered the letter on her desk, its elaborate wax seal broken days ago. "I'm afraid, Mr. Sterling, and I have very different ideas about what culture should accomplish." The previous week had brought several uncomfortable encounters with Victor Sterling, each one revealing more clearly the limitations of his vision. When a group of local children had asked Bella to teach them piano at the schoolhouse, Victor had been horrified at the suggestion of mixing with common families. When the Ladies' Aid Society had requested her help organizing a benefit concert, he had dismissed their efforts as crude entertainment unworthy of serious artistic consideration. "Culture should elevate people," Bella continued, "not separate them into categories of worthy and unworthy. Mr. Sterling sees refinement as a fortress to defend rather than a gift to share." Margaret nodded knowingly. "Henry told me something interesting yesterday. He said James Sterling asked specifically about your situation, whether you were truly committed to Victor's proposal or still considering other options." The mention of James Sterling sent that familiar flutter through Bella's chest. Throughout the week since Margaret's arrival, she had encountered him frequently around town, always in situations that revealed his character. He helped elderly Mrs. Patterson repair her fence without being asked. He quietly paid for medicine when the blacksmith's family couldn't afford it. He treated everyone from the banker to the stable boy with the same respectful courtesy. "I hardly know Mr. James Sterling," Bella said carefully. "We've spoken only briefly." "Perhaps," Margaret suggested with a knowing smile, "that could change today. Henry mentioned that James is organizing the festival's cultural programs. Someone with your musical talents might find opportunities to contribute." The suggestion lingered in Bella's mind as she prepared for the festival. She chose her clothing carefully, selecting a dress of warm bronze silk that was elegant but not ostentatious, refined but approachable. The outfit reflected her growing understanding that true style should invite rather than intimidate. Downstairs, Mrs. Webb was bustling about with unusual energy, preparing special dishes for the hotel's contribution to the festival feast. The older woman paused when she saw Bella, her sharp eyes taking in both the dress and the woman wearing it. "You look like someone who's made important decisions," Mrs. Webb observed. "Care to share them with an old woman who's learned to read faces?" Bella sat down at the kitchen table, accepting a cup of coffee and the comfort of honest conversation. "I'm going to decline Mr. Victor Sterling's offer. His vision of culture is too exclusive, too removed from actual community life." "Smart girl. Victor Sterling's got all the warmth of a marble statue. Impressive to look at, but cold to touch. The problem is, I'm not sure what my alternative is. Return to Boston with my tail between my legs, or try to create something here without his support." Mrs. Webb kneaded bread dough with vigorous strokes, her movements sharp with determination. "Honey, you've been thinking about this all wrong. You don't need Victor Sterling's permission to use your talents for good. This community would welcome genuine culture if someone offered it with a generous heart instead of a superior attitude." The wisdom in these words struck Bella forcefully. She had been so focused on finding someone who appreciated her refinement that she had forgotten the joy of sharing it freely. Culture was not a treasure to be hoarded, but a wellspring meant to nourish others. You think the people of Willowbrook would truly welcome cultural programs? I think, Mrs. Webb said firmly, that people everywhere hunger for beauty and meaning in their lives. They just need someone to offer it without making them feel small for wanting it. Armed with this insight, Bella made her way to the festival grounds with new purpose. The transformation of Willowbrook's main street was remarkable, turning the dusty frontier town into something magical. Local artisans displayed their crafts alongside farmers' produce. Musicians tuned instruments on a makeshift stage. The entire community had come together to celebrate their shared prosperity and culture. At the center of the festivities, James Sterling was directing the setup of a small orchestra platform, his sleeves rolled up and his manner businesslike but patient. Bella watched him resolve a dispute between two musicians about seating arrangements, his diplomatic solution satisfying both parties while maintaining the quality of the performance. "Miss Harrison." His voice held genuine warmth as he noticed her approach. "How delightful to see you here. I was hoping you might consider contributing to our musical program." Up close, James Sterling was even more impressive than Bella had realized. His features were strong and honest, marked by the kind of character that came from facing challenges with integrity. His hands, though calloused from work, moved with surprising grace as he gestured toward the piano that had been moved from the opera house for the festival. "I understand you're quite accomplished musically," he continued. "Would you consider playing something for our afternoon concert? Nothing too formal, just something that might bring the community together." The request was everything that Victor Sterling's cultural vision was not: inclusive rather than exclusive, community-focused rather than self-aggrandizing. "I would be honored to contribute," Bella replied. "What sort of music do you think would be most appropriate?" James smiled, the expression transforming his serious features into something warm and inviting. "Something that speaks to the heart, I think. These people work hard and face real challenges. They deserve music that acknowledges their struggles while lifting their spirits." As they discussed repertoire, Bella found herself drawn into conversation. That revealed the depth of James's understanding about culture's role in community life. He spoke knowledgeably about music and literature, but always in context of how these things could enrich ordinary people's daily existence. "You have an unusual perspective on the arts," Bella observed. "Most people see culture as either unnecessary luxury or exclusive privilege." "I see it as essential nourishment," James replied simply. "Beauty feeds the soul the same way bread feeds the body. Everyone deserves access to both." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the main stage, where Victor Sterling had arrived in his elaborate carriage, dressed as if attending a formal opera rather than a frontier festival. His appearance drew stares and whispers, his obvious effort to distinguish himself from the common celebrants, creating exactly the kind of barrier that Bella had come to deplore. "Isabella, my dear," Victor called, approaching with possessive confidence. "I see you've been discussing music with my cousin. How charming." The casual dismissal in his tone made Bella's jaw tighten. "Mr. Sterling has been kind enough to invite an E to perform in the community concert. I'm looking forward to sharing music with everyone." Victor's expression grew cold. "Surely you don't mean to perform for just anyone who wanders by? Your talents deserve a more discriminating audience." "I believe," Bella said clearly, "that music belongs to everyone who can appreciate it, regardless of their social position or education." The philosophical difference between the cousins crystallized in that moment. Victor saw culture as a commodity to be rationed to the worthy, while James viewed it as a universal human need. The contrast illuminated everything Bella had been struggling to understand about her own values and future. "My dear Isabella," Victor continued, oblivious to her growing opposition. "I've come to collect your answer to my proposal. The cultural season in Denver begins soon, and we should make our preparations." The presumption in his tone, the assumption that she would naturally choose his vision of elevated society, sparked something fierce in Bella's chest. "I'm afraid I must decline your generous offer, Mr. Sterling. We have fundamentally different ideas about culture's purpose and value." Victor's face flushed with wounded pride and barely controlled anger. "You're making a serious mistake, Isabella. Willowbrook has nothing to offer someone of your refinement. You'll waste your talents on people who can't properly appreciate them." "On the contrary," Bella replied with quiet dignity, "I think I'm finally discovering what my talents are truly meant to accomplish." The rejection clearly stunned Victor, who had expected gratitude rather than refusal. His attempt to argue further was interrupted by the festival's opening ceremonies, forcing him to retreat with his wounded ego while Bella took her place at the piano. The afternoon concert became a revelation for both Bella and her audience. She began with classical pieces that showcased her technical skill, drawing appreciative murmurs from listeners who had rarely heard such accomplished performance. But as the program progressed, she found herself adapting her selections to include familiar hymns and folk songs that invited audience participation. The transformation was magical. What had begun as formal concert became community celebration, with voices joining hers in harmonies that filled the mountain air with joyous sound. Children gathered around the piano, their eyes wide with wonder at the music flowing from her fingers. Adults who had seemed intimidated by her refinement relaxed into genuine appreciation and participation. Margaret Chun sang a beautiful Chinese lullaby that her grandmother had taught her, her clear voice carrying across the festival grounds and proving that culture could bridge any divide. Henry Walsh, despite his lack of formal education, offered a cowboy ballad that spoke to the experiences of everyone who had chosen frontier life over Eastern comfort. James Sterling watched from the edge of the crowd, his expression revealing deep appreciation for what Bella was accomplishing. When their eyes met across the gathered faces, she saw recognition in something deeper, an understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. As the concert concluded to enthusiastic applause, James approached the piano with a smile that made Bella's heart skip. "That was extraordinary. You've shown this community something they've never experienced before, culture that includes rather than excludes." "It felt wonderful," Bella admitted, still exhilarated from the performance. "I've never played for an audience so genuinely appreciative. Would you consider staying in Willowbrook permanently?" James asked, his tone carefully casual but his eyes intense with hope. "Not as Victor's cultural director, but as yourself, contributing whatever you feel moved to share." The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond professional arrangements. Bella sensed that James was offering more than employment or even friendship, but partnership in the truest sense of the word. "And what? Would I live on while contributing my cultural gifts?" she asked practically. "Noble sentiments don't pay for room and board." James smiled, the expression revealing his appreciation for her directness. "The Opera House needs a permanent director, someone who understands both quality and community. The position comes with a comfortable salary and living quarters above the theater. More importantly, it would give you complete freedom to develop whatever programs you believe would benefit Willowbrook." The offer was everything Victor Sterling's proposal was not, respecting her independence while providing meaningful work. But Bella sensed there were deeper currents to consider. "And what would you expect from such an arrangement, Mr. Sterling?" "Nothing more than you freely choose to give," he replied simply. "Though I hope that over time, you might come to value my friendship and perhaps something more." The honest admission sent warmth flooding through Bella's chest. Here was a man who appreciated her refinement without trying to control it, who offered partnership without demanding submission, who understood that genuine culture required freedom to flourish. Before she could respond, A disturbance near the Fangway main stage drew their attention. Victor Sterling had cornered Margaret Chun, his voice rising with indignation as he berated her for participating in the concert. "It's precisely this kind of thing that dilutes cultural standards," he was saying loudly enough for nearby listeners to hear. "Allowing anyone to perform reduces the entire enterprise to mere entertainment." The attack on Margaret's contribution, motivated by both cultural elitism and racial prejudice, crystallized everything that was wrong with Victor's vision. Bella felt her temper flare, but before she could intervene, James was already moving toward the confrontation. "Victor," James said quietly but firmly, "I think you've said enough. I'm simply pointing out that cultural programs require proper curation." Victor replied, his voice shrill with defensive anger. "Not everyone is suited for refined entertainment." "Miss Chun's performance was beautiful and moving," James countered. "It brought joy to everyone who heard it. That seems like the perfect definition of successful culture." The confrontation drew a crowd, with most observers clearly supporting James's position over Victor's. The community that Victor had dismissed as uncultured was demonstrating better values than he possessed, rallying around inclusion and appreciation rather than exclusion and criticism. "You're all fools," Victor declared, his composure finally cracking completely. "This town deserves the mediocrity it celebrates. Isabella, when you tire of wasting your talents on peasants, you know where to find me." With that parting shot, Victor stalked away, his elegant clothes and superior attitude intact, but his influence over the day's events thoroughly shattered. The crowd gradually dispersed, returning to their festival celebrations with renewed energy. "I apologize for my cousin's behavior," James said to Margaret, his genuine concern evident. "His words don't represent this community's values." Margaret smiled gratefully. "Thank you for defending me, Mr. Sterling. It means more than you know." As the festival continued into the evening, Bella found herself drawn into conversation. After conversation with townspeople eager to discuss cultural programs and possibilities, the elderly schoolteacher wanted to organize literary discussions. The blacksmith's wife hoped for art classes. The minister requested help planning musical services. Each conversation reinforced her growing understanding that Willowbrook's residents hungered for cultural enrichment. They simply needed someone to offer it without condescension or exclusivity. The community's enthusiasm for today's concerts proved that refinement could flourish anywhere if nurtured with genuine care. As the evening grew late and the festival began winding down, James appeared at Bella's side with 2 cups of cider and an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Successful day," he observed, handing her a cup. "I think you've found your answer about Willowbrook's cultural potential." Bella sipped the warm cider, watching families pack up their picnic blankets and children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "More than that, I think I found my answer about what I want to do with my life." "And what would that be?" She turned to face him fully, seeing in his honest features the possibility of partnership she had been seeking since leaving Boston. "I want to accept your offer of the opera house position. But more than that, I want to build something lasting. Here, cultural programs that serve the entire community regardless of background or education." James's smile was radiant with joy and relief. "I was hoping you'd say that. And the other question I asked about friendship and perhaps something more." Bella felt her cheeks warm, but she met his gaze directly. "I think, Mr. Sterling, that building a cultural program together would give us ample opportunity to explore that possibility." "James," he corrected gently, "if we're going to be partners in this enterprise, you should probably use my given name, James, then. And you should call me Bella." As they walked back toward the hotel through the lantern-lit streets, Bella reflected on how completely her circumstances had changed. A month ago, she had been a rejected mail-order bride with nowhere to turn. Tonight, she was a woman with meaningful work, genuine prospects, and the beginning of what promised to be a true partnership. "There's something else we should discuss," James said as they paused outside the hotel. "The opera house position comes with certain community responsibilities. You'd be expected to organize events for everyone, not just those who appreciate classical music." Bella laughed, thinking of the day's revelations about inclusive culture. "I think I can manage that challenge. After all, the best culture speaks to universal human experiences, doesn't it?" "Exactly what I hoped you'd say." As James bid her goodnight with a gentle squeeze of her hand, Bella climbed the hotel stairs to her room with a heart full of anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she began building the cultural program she envisioned. There would be opposition from some quarters and obstacles to overcome. But tonight, she had found what she had been seeking since leaving Boston, a place where her refinement was valued not as exclusivity, but as contribution, where her culture could flourish in service to others rather than in isolation from them. Most importantly, she had found a man who appreciated her strengths without trying to diminish them, who offered partnership based on mutual respect rather than domination. 6 months later, the Willowbrook Opera House had become the cultural heart of the territory, hosting concerts that drew audiences from 3 counties. Bella's programs included everything from classical recitals to folk music festivals, literary discussions to art exhibitions. The inclusive approach had proven wildly successful, creating enthusiasm for culture among people who had never considered themselves cultured. Margaret and Henry Walsh had married in a ceremony that demonstrated the community's growing acceptance of diversity. Their partnership had flourished based on mutual honesty and respect, proving that authentic relationships could overcome any social obstacle. As for Bella and James, their professional partnership had deepened into personal connection, built on shared values and complementary strengths. His proposal, offered on the Opera House stage after a particularly successful concert, had been accepted with a heart full of joy and confidence. Standing now in her elegant apartment above the theater, Bella looked out over the town that had become her true home. Willowbrook had grown and prospered, attracting families drawn by its combination of economic opportunity and cultural richness. The community that had once seemed suspicious of refinement now embraced it as essential to their identity. The piano that had once sat neglected at the train depot now occupied a place of honor in the opera house, its music bringing joy to hundreds of listeners every month. Her fancy gowns, once criticized as inappropriate for frontier life, now graced stages throughout the territory as she performed for audiences who appreciated beauty without feeling diminished by it. Most importantly, Bella had discovered that true refinement was not about excluding others but about elevating them. Not about maintaining barriers but about building bridges. Culture, she had learned, belonged to everyone willing to embrace it, and the most sophisticated response to that truth was sharing it as generously as possible. The mail-order bride who had been called too fancy for ranch life had found her perfect place not by becoming less than she was, but by using her gifts in service of something larger than herself. In doing so, she had discovered that the finest culture was not that which separated people into categories of worthy and unworthy, but that which revealed the inherent dignity and beauty in every human heart. The first snowfall of winter arrived early that year, blanketing Willowbrook in pristine white that transformed the mountain town into something from a fairy tale. Bella stood at the tall windows of her opera house apartment, watching the flakes drift past the gaslight like tiny dancers. 6 months had passed since the Harvest Festival, and the changes in both her life and the community seemed as dramatic as the seasonal transformation outside. Her reflection in the window showed a woman who had found her place in the world. Gone was the uncertainty that had marked her early days in Colorado territory. In its place was the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered her true purpose and was living it fully every day. A soft knock at her door interrupted her morning contemplation. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Coleman. the elderly woman who helped maintain the opera house and had become something of a surrogate grandmother to Bella. Instead, James Sterling entered, carrying a breakfast tray and wearing the smile that never failed to make her heart flutter. Even after months of courtship, his presence still had the power to brighten any room he entered. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, setting the tray on her small dining table. "Mrs. Webb insisted I bring this up personally. She says you're working too hard and not eating enough." Bella accepted the gentle scolding with good humor. "Mrs. Webb treats me like I'm still that lost mail-order bride who arrived last spring instead of a grown woman capable of managing her own affairs." "Mrs. Webb cares about you," James replied, pulling out a chair for her with the courtly manners that were second nature to him. "As do a great many people in this town. Your welfare has become a community concern." The truth of his words warmed Bella more than the hot coffee Mrs. Webb had sent. Over the past months, she had woven herself into the fabric of Willowbrook. Life in ways she never could have imagined when she first stepped off that train. The Opera House had become the beating heart of the community's cultural life, hosting everything from children's recitals to traveling theatrical troupes. "Speaking of community concerns," James continued, his tone becoming more serious, "there's something we need to discuss. I received a telegram yesterday from the territorial capital." Bella looked up from her breakfast, noting the slight tension in his voice. "What sort of telegram?" "The territorial governor is planning an inspection tour of the region's cultural institutions. Willowbrook has been specifically mentioned as an example of successful frontier cultural development. He'll be arriving next month with a delegation from Denver." The news should have thrilled Bella, representing as it did official recognition of everything she had worked to build. Instead, she felt a flutter of anxiety. "That sounds like wonderful recognition for our programs." "It is," James agreed. "But there's more. Victor has been corresponding with certain members of the delegation, apparently offering his own version of events regarding Willowbrook's cultural development." Bella set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "What sort of version?" "According to my sources in Denver, he's been claiming that the town's cultural programs lack proper sophistication and leadership. He suggested that the territorial government should intervene to ensure appropriate standards." The implications of Victor Sterling's interference sent a chill through Bella that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside. In the months since the Harvest Festival, Victor had made several attempts to undermine her work, though always from a distance. He had written letters to Denver newspapers criticizing frontier cultural programs as misguided attempts to bring refinement to those incapable of appreciating it. He had tried to convince traveling performers to bypass Willowbrook in favor of more sophisticated venues. "What exactly is he hoping to accomplish?" Bella asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Control," James replied bluntly. "If he can convince the territorial government that Willowbrook's cultural programs are inadequate, he might be able to position himself as the solution. The territory is eager to demonstrate cultural advancement to potential investors and settlers. They won't want to be embarrassed by programs that don't meet Eastern standards." Bella stood and walked back to the window, her mind racing through the implications. Everything she had built, all the relationships she had formed, the trust she had earned from the community, could be swept away by bureaucratic decree if Victor succeeded in his campaign. "There's something else," James continued gently. "The inspection will include a formal evaluation of the Opera House's programs and leadership. They'll expect to see demonstrations of our cultural offerings." "A performance, you mean?" "Several performances, actually. Musical programs, theatrical presentations, educational demonstrations. Everything that supposedly proves our cultural sophistication." Bella turned back to face him, seeing in his expression the same concern she felt. "And if we don't meet their standards?" "The territorial funding for cultural programs could be redirected to other communities. More importantly, they might install their own cultural director, someone with credentials that satisfied Denver's requirements. The threat was clear and devastating. Bella had no formal credentials beyond her finishing school education and natural talent. In a direct comparison with university-trained cultural administrators, she would be found wanting by any bureaucratic standard. "So Victor gets what he's always wanted," she said quietly. "Proof that I'm unqualified for the position I hold." James rose and crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Victor gets nothing unless we allow him to win. The question is, are we going to fight for what we've built here?" The determination in his voice sparked an answering fire in Bella's chest. They had created something beautiful and meaningful in Willowbrook, cultural programs that serve the entire community rather than an elite few. The territorial inspection might threaten that work, but it also offered an opportunity to demonstrate its value to a wider audience. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. James smiled, the expression revealing his admiration for her courage. "We give them exactly what they want to see. A demonstration of Willowbrook's cultural achievements that no Denver bureaucrat could dismiss as unsophisticated." Over the following weeks, Bella threw herself into preparation for the territorial inspection with an intensity that impressed even those who knew her well. She organized rehearsals for musical programs that would showcase both classical refinement and local talent. She arranged educational demonstrations that would prove the community's growing cultural literacy. She coordinated with neighboring towns to ensure the largest possible audience for the inspection events. The challenge was creating programs sophisticated enough to satisfy territorial officials, while remaining true to the inclusive values that had made Willowbrook's cultural scene so successful. Bella refused to abandon the community members who had supported her work in favor of a more elite approach that might impress outside observers. Margaret Chen proved invaluable during the preparation period, using her artistic talents to design promotional materials and stage decorations that rivaled anything produced in Denver. Her marriage to Henry Walsh had flourished, and their partnership had become a model of how different backgrounds could create stronger unions when built on mutual respect and honest communication. "You know," Margaret said one afternoon as they worked together on stage designs, "Victor Sterling might have done us a favor by forcing this inspection." Bella looked up from the program notes she was writing. "How do you figure that?" "Think about it. We've been working quietly here in Willowbrook, building something wonderful but relatively isolated. This inspection will bring territorial attention to what we've accomplished. If we succeed, it could lead to support for similar programs throughout Colorado." The observation was characteristically insightful. Margaret had a gift for seeing the broader implications of local events, a perspective that complemented Bella's focus on immediate community needs. "And if we fail?" Bella asked. "Then we fail fighting for something we believe in," Margaret replied firmly. "That's better than compromising our values to satisfy people who don't understand what we're trying to accomplish." As the inspection date approached, word spread throughout the territory about the evaluation of Willowbrook's cultural programs. The event had taken on symbolic importance beyond its original scope, representing a test of whether frontier communities could develop genuine cultural sophistication, or whether such refinement required traditional institutional support. Victor Sterling arrived 2 days before the official delegation, taking rooms at the Grand Hotel and making his presence felt throughout the community. He moved through town like a conquering hero, pointing out deficiencies in the Opera House programs and questioning the qualifications of local participants. "Miss Harrison means well," he told anyone who would listen, "but good intentions can't substitute for proper training and credentials. The territorial officials will see immediately that Willowbrook needs professional cultural leadership." His campaign of undermining criticism reached Bella's ears through Mrs. Webb, who had appointed herself as the unofficial intelligence network for the Opera House. That pompous peacock is telling folks you're playing at being cultured instead of actually being cultured," Mrs. Webb reported indignantly. Says the territorial government will shut down the opera house programs once they see how amateur everything is. The attack stung because they echoed Bella's own private doubts about her qualifications. She had no university degree in music or theater, no formal certification in cultural administration. Everything she had accomplished in Willowbrook had been built on natural talent, hard work, and genuine care for the community's cultural development. "Maybe he's right," she confided to James the evening before the inspection. "Maybe I am just an amateur playing at sophistication." James took her hands in his touch warm and reassuring. "Bella, look at what you've accomplished here. 6 months ago, this community had no regular cultural programming. Now we host events that draw audiences from across the territory. Children who never heard classical music are learning to play instruments. Adults who thought culture was only for rich people are discovering the joy of poetry and theater. But compared to someone with proper credentials don't create culture," James interrupted gently. "People do. Heart does. You've brought more genuine cultural development to this community than any number of university-trained administrators could accomplish." The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for the territorial inspection. Bella dressed with particular care, choosing a gown of deep burgundy velvet that managed to be both elegant and approachable. Her appearance needed to convey authority without intimidation, sophistication without superiority. The territorial delegation arrived precisely on schedule. A group of serious-looking officials in expensive overcoats who studied Willowbrook with the air of inspectors examining a questionable commodity. Governor Thompson himself led the group, a distinguished man in his 60s whose political career depended on demonstrating Colorado Territory's readiness for statehood. "Miss Harrison," the governor said as James introduced them, "I've heard interesting reports about your work here. Both positive and, shall we say, concerned. I hope you'll judge our programs based on what you observe rather than what others have told you." Bella replied diplomatically. The inspection began with a tour of the Opera House facilities, which had been polished to perfection for the occasion. Bella explained the history of the building and its role in community life, emphasizing the inclusive approach that had made the program so successful. Victor Sterling shadowed the group throughout the tour, offering pointed commentary about the limitations of amateur cultural development. "You'll notice," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "that the programs lack the sophisticated direction one would expect from professional cultural institutions." "And what would you consider proper sophisticated direction, Governor?" Thompson asked, his tone carefully neutral. "University-trained leadership for one thing," Victor replied smoothly. "Formal credentials that ensure appropriate standards. Cultural programming that elevates rather than merely entertains." The implicit criticism of Bella's work was unmistakable, and she felt her temper flare. But before she could respond, an unexpected voice joined the conversation. "Excuse me, sir," said young Tommy Patterson, the blacksmith's son who had become one of Bella's most dedicated piano students. "Are you saying Miss Harrison isn't a real teacher because she doesn't have a piece of paper saying she is?" The boy's direct question caught Victor off guard. "Well, certainly credentials matter because Miss Harrison taught me to read music when nobody thought I was smart enough to learn," Tommy continued with the fearless honesty of childhood. "And she taught my sister to sing so pretty that it makes Ma cry happy tears. And she helped Pa write a letter to Grandma back in Missouri using fancy words that made Grandma write back, saying how proud she was." The testimonial from an unexpected source silenced Victor's objections and clearly impressed the territorial officials. Governor Thompson knelt to Tommy's level, his formal demeanor softening. "That sounds like excellent teaching to me, young man. What's your favorite thing about Miss Harrison's lessons?" "She makes everything feel possible," Tommy replied without hesitation. "Like maybe I could learn anything if I tried hard enough." The boy's words crystallized everything Bella had been trying to accomplish with her programs. Culture wasn't about exclusion or intimidation, but about opening doors and expanding possibilities for everyone willing to walk through them. The formal evaluation continued with demonstrations of the Opera House's various programs. Local musicians performed classical pieces with skill that surprised the territorial officials. The community theater group presented scenes from Shakespeare with passion and competence that proved frontier audiences could appreciate sophisticated drama. The children's choir sang with such pure beauty that several delegation members were visibly moved. Each performance reinforced the same message that Tommy Patterson had articulated: culture belonged to anyone willing to embrace it, and the most important qualification for cultural leadership was the ability to inspire others to discover their own potential. Victor Sterling grew increasingly agitated as the demonstrations proceeded, clearly recognizing that his campaign to discredit Bella's work was failing. The territorial officials were responding positively to the inclusive approach that he had, criticized as unprofessional. The climax of the inspection came with Bella's own performance, a piano recital that she had planned as the centerpiece of the evaluation. She had chosen pieces that demonstrated both technical skill and emotional depth, beginning with classical compositions that proved her musical competence and transitioning to arrangements of folk songs that included audience participation. As her fingers moved across the keys, Bella felt the same joy she had experienced during the Harvest Festival, the deep satisfaction of sharing beauty with people who hungered for it. The territorial officials listened with growing appreciation, clearly recognizing the quality of both her performance and her connection with the audience. "This is precisely what frontier cultural development should accomplish," Governor Thompson murmured to his aide, his comment carrying clearly in the acoustically perfect Opera House. Victor Sterling made one final desperate attempt to undermine Bella's success. "Governor Thompson," he called out as the recital concluded to enthusiastic applause, "surely you can see that while Miss Harrison is talented, she lacks the formal qualifications necessary for territorial cultural leadership. The position requires someone with proper credentials and institutional training." The governor turned to face Victor with an expression that had grown increasingly cold throughout the afternoon. "Mr. Sterling, I've observed Miss Harrison's work for several hours now. I've seen the program she's developed, the community she's built, the genuine cultural advancement she's fostered. What exactly do you think credentials could add to such demonstrated success?" "Professional standards," Victor replied desperately. "Institutional accountability. Proper cultural hierarchy." "I see," the governor said dryly. "And what cultural programs have you developed that demonstrate these professional standards?" The question exposed the fundamental weakness in Victor's position. For all his criticism of Bella's work, he had never actually created anything himself. His understanding of culture was theoretical rather than practical, based on exclusion rather than inclusion. "I've studied at the finest institutions," Victor protested. "I understand what constitutes genuine cultural refinement. And yet," Governor Thompson observed, "Miss Harrison has actually created it. Here, in this frontier community, with these supposedly unqualified people. Perhaps we should be asking Miss Harrison to share her methods with other territorial communities, rather than questioning her qualifications." The territorial delegation's final report praised Willowbrook's cultural programs as a model for frontier development, specifically commending Bella's innovative approach to inclusive cultural education. The Opera House received expanded territorial funding and official designation as a regional cultural center. Victor Sterling departed the next morning without speaking to anyone, his campaign of interference having backfired completely. His attempt to prove Bella unqualified had instead demonstrated the superior value of her practical approach over his theoretical criticisms. In the weeks that followed the inspection, Invitations poured in from other territorial communities, seeking Bella's advice on developing their own cultural programs. The governor himself requested that she prepare a formal report on inclusive cultural development that could guide policy throughout Colorado Territory. "You've become more than Willowbrook's cultural director," James observed one evening as they reviewed the various requests for her expertise. "You're becoming the territorial authority on frontier cultural development." Bella looked up from the correspondence spread across her desk, struck by the irony of her situation. A mail order. Bride rejected for being too fancy has become an expert on frontier culture. "There's something poetic about that." "There's something inevitable about it," James corrected gently. "You found your true calling, and it turns out to be exactly what the territory needed." As winter deepened and the cultural season flourished, Bella reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Samuel Crawford's rejection had felt like the end of her dreams, but it had actually been the beginning of her real life. Victor Sterling's interference had threatened to destroy her work, but it had instead validated everything she had accomplished. The proposal came on a snowy February evening as they walked home from a particularly successful concert. James stopped. Beneath a street lamp, its warm glow creating a circle of light in the falling snow, and took her hands in his. "Bella," he said, his voice soft but certain, "we've built something beautiful together here in Willowbrook. The cultural programs, the community we've fostered, the life we've created. I want to make it permanent." He dropped to one knee in the snow, producing a ring that caught the lamp like captured starfire. "Will you marry me? Not because you need rescue or security, but because we're better together than apart." The proposal was everything Bella had dreamed of but never expected to find, an offer of true partnership from a man who valued her exactly as she was. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, absolutely yes." Their wedding took place in the Opera House the following spring, a ceremony that brought together the entire community they had helped build. Margaret Chun sang a blessing in 3 languages while Tommy Patterson played violin accompaniment. Mrs. Webb provided a feast that satisfied everyone from the territorial governor to the newest mail-order bride who had just arrived seeking her own fresh start. As Bella and James exchanged vows surrounded by the people whose lives they had touched through their cultural work, she understood that she had found something more valuable than the comfortable marriage she had originally sought. She had discovered her purpose, her community, and her perfect partner all in a place where she had initially felt unwelcome. The mail-order bride who had been called too fancy for ranch life had become the woman who proved that true refinement was about lifting others up rather than holding them down. Culture, she had learned, was not a privilege to be rationed, but a gift to be shared. And the finest expression of sophistication was making beauty accessible to everyone willing to embrace it. Years later, as the Colorado Territory prepared for statehood, Bella's cultural programs were cited as evidence of the region's civilizational advancement. The Opera House had spawned similar institutions throughout the territory, each one built on the principles of inclusion and community service that she had pioneered in Willowbrook. Standing on the stage where she had first proved her worth to the territorial delegation, now addressing a conference of cultural leaders from across the West, Bella marveled at the path that had brought her to this moment, the refined Eastern lady who had feared she was too fancy for frontier life, had discovered that the frontier needed exactly the kind of refinement she had to offer. True culture, she told her audience, was not about exclusion or superiority, but about revealing the inherent dignity and potential in every human being. The most sophisticated response to beauty was sharing it as widely as possible, and the finest expression of refinement was making others feel more capable and worthy rather than less. As applause filled the Opera House, Bella caught sight of James in the audience, his proud smile reminding her that the best partnerships were built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Beside him sat Margaret and Henry, Their own successful marriage proof that authentic love could overcome any social obstacle. The woman who had once been rejected for being too fancy had become the architect of a cultural revolution that proved refinement belonged everywhere people were willing to embrace it. In finding her true calling, she had transformed not just her own life, but the entire definition of what culture could accomplish in the American West. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.